Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of GeoData Vision.
Welcome to today's episode on the Community Reinvestment Act. We call today's episode Teaching About the Community Reinvestment Act, and we are joined by a very special guest, Linda Ezuka. Linda Ezuka is the founder of CRAtoday and the CRAhub, an exclusive membership service for bank professionals to master the art of the Community Reinvestment Act, get exam ready, and leverage capital for the greater good. Linda also leads the Hawaiian Bankers Association as its executive director. She also hosts the CRA podcast, a podcast to elevate conversations around the Community Reinvestment Act. Linda has over 30 years of community development experience with emphasis on CRA compliance, CRA on-site and remote training, community development finance, and CDFI investments and partnerships. She has led CRA programs for large banks and has consulted with banks of all sizes and regulators. Linda, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, in my introduction, I mentioned how you work with bankers from all over the country to instruct them and inform them about the Community Reinvestment Act. Why don't you fill in the gaps? Exactly what do you teach CRA officers and maybe directors too?
Well, sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I founded CRAtoday to address a gap in the market. I was fortunate enough to have a mentor early in my banking career that was deeply committed to community development. I learned by doing, right? I had guidance, however, and there wasn't really any formal training per se on the very detailed aspects of the CRA. I did go to the ABA's compliance school, which I loved, and I was fortunate enough to participate in the National Community Development Lending School. But fast forward 20, 25 years, I paused to reflect on the lack of training opportunities that exist in our industry, and especially at the advanced level. So I formed CRAtoday in 2019 and launched the CRAhub, our community of CRA professionals, in 2020 during the pandemic. I help CRA professionals, new and seasoned and everything in between, again, how to master the CRA, stay exam ready, and leverage capital for the greater good. So there's many, many different ways we approach the CRA, and we do it mostly in community, in a community of peers.
Wow, that's fantastic. And this is Dean, by the way, from M&M Consulting, and Len and I obviously share in the kind of the moderation of our podcast over that we've done over the last couple of years. But given how extensive you train bankers in CRA, Linda, what are the CRA questions that bankers ask most frequently?
Wow. Well, it's interesting. The CRA, as most of you know, is the most subjective consumer compliance regulation. So it's not enough to understand the law and the implementing regulations. I help CRA professionals understand those nuances as it relates to positioning their bank's community development activities to withstand examiner scrutiny. I always say, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So, right? So to answer your question more specifically, many bankers want a specific linear roadmap to CRA compliance. Even their executives will say, I want to know exactly what I need to do to get an outstanding or to get an outstanding rating. And oftentimes they say, can you just tell me how much is enough? And as you both know, it's just not that easy. So I work with our professionals so that they can get ahead of their examiners to answer the questions themselves. So, what are the community's needs? And no one knows their bank better, their bank's performance, or their community better than them. So I always share that it is their responsibility to strategically lead their compliance program and their CRA program with the intended impact so that they arrive at that entrance meeting right before their CRA exam and they're confident, they know their performance, they know their gaps, and they drive the narrative and their story of impact. Now, I would say to more specifically answer, there is one pain point that is universal. And that is identifying community development loans. Every year, we hold a community development loan challenge training for bankers, and it fills up fast because it is the most subjective and complex element of the lending test. There's really no checkbox, no FDIC or call code that will say, yep, it's a community development loan, I am sure. So it's typically up to the CRA professional to understand the credit approval memorandum, to review them, to find the primary purpose, and then prove impact. And every bank, in my opinion, underreports community development loans. There's just not enough time in the day as bankers organically serve their communities, as well as strategically partner to drive impact to originate community development loans, right? There's just so much to do. So the art of the CRA, as I say, is uncovering all of the activities that the bank naturally does and deploys by residing within the communities in which they serve. I know that was long-winded, but
That was excellent.
I can go on and on and on.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Yes, and Linda, one of the concepts that's really important in CRA is this concept of performance context. And we all know it's very important to CRA performance ratings. How do you tackle that issue? How do you explain what performance context means to bankers that they have to know more than, 5% of their loans were in the low income tracks? That's only being halfway there. So, how do you tackle that issue of performance context and how do you explain it to your students?
Absolutely. Well, it performance context is widely misunderstood and oftentimes poorly executed, sadly. So I have a story. Some 25 years ago or so, I was in my exam and meeting with the CRA team, and I proudly presented my binders. Yes, they were binders back then. That was, back in the AOL dial-up days. And I was really quite proud. And I had all these newsletter clippings and stats and data, and it was around affordable housing and workforce development and more, right? I spent a lot of time um, gathering all of this performance context. And the examiners essentially said, well, and not these words, but oh, that's cute. But none of that matters unless it is in context to your performance. Well, that was a light bulb moment. I was like, oh, darn it. Okay. Well, from then on, I paired performance data to specific performance analytics that related to my performance within the communities in which I serve. So within the CRAhub, we focus on identifying performance gaps and then wrapping around performance context around a specific deficiency, for an example. So let's say a bank has difficulty originating mortgage loans to low to moderate income individuals. So that is the fact, right? Because we're looking at data compared to the aggregate, which means the pool of banks, right? And they are below. So they have a gap. They are below their peers in terms of deploying and originating loans to low and moderate income individuals. That's the fact. Then we start to ask questions. So we go internally to the market presidents and we say, what are some of those barriers? What are those barriers to originating loans to low to moderate income individuals? So we gather that. And after we understand from the market perspective what's happening, then we can start to understand, okay, well, what else, right? So, what data should we also produce that gives more context to our market president's view, right? To prove what might be going on. It might be that, there's a high cost of housing, right? Or there might be low inventory, or there might be a lot of there might be a lot of cash buyers in the market, right? So many things could be happening, but it's up to the CRA professionals to gather that information in that context. Then, lastly, I say, well, what else? So, performance context in my mind is, well, what else is happening? So, maybe you might also want to partner with nonprofit organizations like a NeighborWorks organization to support families to get mortgage ready or to stand up a special purpose loan program. So, the possibilities are many. And the bottom line for performance context, from my vantage point, is asking and answering the question, so what is going on? What is real? What is the data? What is your bank doing about it internally, organically? What's happening in the community? And then what will you do about it to change, right? To further meet the credit needs of the community. And that is the art of the CRA.
Wow, that was a incredible explanation because I do get a lot of questions relative to the performance context. So I appreciate that very thorough answer and response. Um, CRA is all about meeting the needs for credit services in the community served by the bank. So tell us how you educate bankers on identifying and measuring the need for credit services.
Sure. Well, I think this is a little tricky as well, right? This is where a CRA professional really needs to understand their community. And you can't do that by just driving your CRA program from a compliance standpoint and, staying in your office working on all of the data analytics. You really need to be able to look up, out, and get out of the office to understand what truly is happening in the community, who are your key stakeholders, what are the biggest concerns, and really interfacing and working in community to learn what might the largest to learn what might be happening at on the ground or what might be needed from the vantage point of consumers or from nonprofits that work with LMI individuals or with small businesses. So most importantly is we need to get out of the office and start to gather information and be in community with stakeholders so that we can really have a sense of what the true needs are. And that it takes a village, right? We
Mm.
can't do it in a vacuum.
Yes, I agree. Are you still there?
I am,
Oh,
yes.
fantastic. Well, I always said that too, Linda. For some reason, I thought that maybe we got derailed off from our podcast today. But, I always said that when I was a commercial lender, you need to know your client better than the client themselves and in order to identify needs. And it's the same with, I think, with community development. As you said, get out from behind your desk, go out and see what's going on in the community. What so another question I had is, what are the CRA topics that are most confusing to bankers that you train, and how do you answer?
Well, I would say the community development loans are still the most subjective element of the CRA. So I'll certainly talk about that a little bit later. But the community development loans and community development investments are a little more complex because there's different structures and financing. And oftentimes we really have to put on our commercial lender hat on and really review that credit approval memorandum and look deeper into what's happening with the borrower, what's happening in terms of the impact of the workforce based on this credit, understanding what the working capital needs are. Well, all of this is, this is credit underwriting, and commercial lenders, as you mentioned, care deeply about this and know this and get to know their borrower. But the community development officer, the CRA officer, hasn't really had that range of experience. So I would say community development loans in particular is, a point for which it's not only subjective, it's also dealing with a very fundamental element of banking, which is extending credit. So I think that that's definitely a pain point, if you will. And then investments, of course, because our CRA professionals are not in Treasury Department or, have a range of experience in placing investments, but it's a critical point in meeting the credit needs of a community are those two elements. So I can go on and on, really. That's
just CRA, I think.
I know. It's interesting because so often our CRA officers, they walk past the wrong desk and they get assigned CRA sometimes. And some people underestimate how challenging it is to run a CRA program. You really have to understand banking. You need to understand how your bank operates and what its priorities are and its strategies. And then you're really needing to work with all these stakeholders and truly position your bank to understanding the impact that you make. And it takes quite a bit to really put your arms around it all and position it so that you can get the credit that you deserve for the work that the bank is doing and deploying.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I know for all of us out there, CRA doesn't stand for the coffee reception area, by the way. but we certainly talk about it a lot.
Oh, yes. Well, it requires a lot of coffee.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Well, this certainly has been an informative and interesting session about the legacy CRA today. I'm certain we could go on for another 3 or 4 sessions, but
if you'd let me, for sure.
But what I want to explore in our next episode will be the new 2023 CRA, which I know I've been getting a lot of questions about. I'm certain Dean has been getting a lot of questions about. And Linda, you for sure with your students have been getting a lot of questions. So that itself is worthy of at least one full episode. So we're going to end this episode today about the legacy CRA and get ready for the next recording about the 2023 CRA. This is Len Suzio with Geodata Vision saying thank you, Linda Ezuka, for joining us today and helping us inform our audience.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And this is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting. And yes, thank you very much, Linda. It's been a true pleasure getting your insight. And I look forward to our second podcast recording.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and Geodata Vision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.